I was going to talk today about the Stockholm rewrite, and the Stockholm rewrite is the antithesis of the narrative of the podcast up until now, so I do feel somewhat agitated that the former has to go with the latter. But the Stockholm rewrite came through, I need to give some background history obviously to this, but the development of the simulation initially came in almost complete isolation in Australia. It moved from when I had glandular fever into the shed environment where I developed in relative isolation, although there was a good flux of people that came through that prompted me, that discussed things with me, and that actually basically came to spend time with me, which was wonderful. Nick Gaffney and various others came from quite far distances to come and spend time in the shed and bounce ideas off and talk about philosophy and things like that, and it was a great period of time for me. And then I moved to the US, and the US was in many ways a chilling of this. I met people like Steve Wozniak, spent a lot of time with these kinds of people, these caliber of people, for want of it's really an opposing terminology. But anyway, I spent time with Wozniak and his friends and people like Doug Rushkoff and other contemporary American theorists, and it was a complete waste of time in a development associated with Noble Ape. So I kind of was spat out of the speculative technology revolution and ended up in the UK, and in relatively short order ended up in Stockholm. And I can't remember how long, the whole period of the Stockholm rewrite is really a flux, but I had the simulation which I had redeveloped for the demonstration at NYU, and I put into the podcast the feed from the NYU talk, so you probably have a keen appreciation of where I was at when I gave the NYU talk, and had invested some time in developing the simulation, but thought that the simulation needed a complete rework. It needed to be made formally open source as opposed to just free software, and the structure of the simulation needed to be transparent so others could come to it and develop from it. And here Pedro and Riddle kind of came through, and a number of other people. I mean, obviously the Apple developers and the Intel developers and the people that have used Noble Ape have been very receptive to the ideas in the Stockholm rewrite. And it also came from the launch of macOS 10 and these ideas of these kind of block diagrams describing things as a whole and the various components and modularization of the code. I do reflect that because I have limited formal, I don't have a computer science degree, I have studied computer science formally, I did some computational physics, but my background isn't with regards to software engineering in a formal sense. So what was coming together at that period of time, also working for a large corporation at the time, was a sense of formality in the coding process and the structural process that I wanted to be represented also in the Noble Ape development. So the Stockholm rewrite was really about taking the components of the Noble Ape simulation and making them autonomous parts. This created a simulation core, it created the file handling as a component, it created what I call the GUI layer, which is separate from the simulation core and provides an interface into the platform-specific code, Windows code, Mac code, Linux code. And the Stockholm rewrite isn't a fixed piece of time. It started in Stockholm and then, as has come out in the most recent mail out, moved on to be something that was part of the ethos of the simulation and continues on really to this day. It was a set of ideas in terms of structure and in terms of moving the code into something that had a number of parts that represented, both in diagram and in actual code as well as documentation, the various sections of the simulation. And I think it brought the simulation into a degree of maturity which can be followed in the source logs. I've kind of renaissance in referencing the source logs in the most recent mail out and going back and thinking, I spent an inordinate amount of time in Wilmslow in the UK just going through these various ideas, and because my time was kind of corpusalized in terms of just having kind of after hours time, and I remember looking out the window over beautiful green fields, as it was the case in Wilmslow, and just working on the Noble Ape code on an old Mac that I'd salvaged from a dumpster, actually. And so all these things came together. Stockholm rewrite really describes more time than just Stockholm, but also things like integrating OpenGL, the development of Ocelot, the development of the multi-window simulation. All these things occurred soon after the Stockholm rewrite. And I'd like to get it more into documentation. I do have a brief kind of discussion of the Stockholm rewrite, but the power and the passion that came through this period of time of being kind of in confines, listening to lots of Noble Ape-related music, and just getting a sense of what the emotion of the whole development had been to date, was something that really kind of gelled in Stockholm, and it was a re-energizing, basically, of the development, which continued on. And at various points, I mean, the development of Excerpt and also the stuff that Apple and Intel have done, and also the stuff that Riddle P and Pedro have done, and the IEEE article, all these things are kind of energy points as well, in terms of being amazing points of reinforcement that what I'm doing with Noble Ape is actually something that's productive and useful to others, as well as something that's deeply insightful for myself. So all these things come together. But Stockholm was the start of the contemporary simulation